Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And this is one that was recommended to me by YouTube, of all things. I began to notice that this stuff just started appearing in my sort of suggested videos. I had never even heard of this case. I had no idea who Gypsy Rose Blanchard was, or Dee Dee Blanchard as well. Sometimes I would see that name when I'm watching suggested videos. It's just like, but it kept suggesting this to me. I thought maybe it was because I was watching the show Mom on YouTube, with Anna Faris and Allison Janney, or sometimes they just really push stuff on you, like, why are there 96 million black balls in a reservoir? But eventually I decided to click on some of the links, and it didn't take too long before I found the HBO documentary on YouTube for free. And I watched that one and some other things about the case, and absolutely horrendous and disgusting. It's a very sad and tragic story, but it's also a story that could have easily been prevented. I would also say, though, I have not yet seen the show The Act, which is a Hulu series that I learned about only from people in the comments section, and a few other YouTubers were talking about the show The Act. That's another thing that I hope to get to. Like, one time recently I was talking about how I can't keep up with all these series because there's so many different things that you need to finish first, then you can start another series and a mini-series. But to talk about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Okay, so Dee Dee Blanchard, the mother, is raising her daughter to believe that she has cancer, specifically leukemia, muscular dystrophy. She needs a feeding tube, and apparently when you get a feeding tube inserted into you, they don't use anesthetic, and she tells her she has a bunch of other minor conditions as well, such as sleep apnea, and that actually started when Gypsy Rose was only 3 months old. There were a variety of reasons why this happened. One of them is for attention, another one is for profit. Because this comes into something called Munchausen syndrome, Munchausen by proxy, where the parent is intentionally making their child sick for benefits. But most of the time, though, with Munchausen syndrome that I've been familiar with in the past, it's been more about attention, at least the cases that I've heard about. I think in The Sixth Sense there's even something about this, about Munchausen syndrome. One of the people that Haley Joel Osment is talking to is dealing with, it's someone involved with that, but it's about just getting attention, getting sympathy, getting people to cook you casseroles, and just people are just using you as the center point, and you get addicted to that sort of thing, so you intentionally keep your child sick or disabled or in a non-functioning way for the social benefits. But in this case with Dee Dee Blanchard, she's doing all of this stuff to her daughter because of financial gain as well. Dee Dee's biological father, who didn't live with her at the time, not for many, many years, so he was off in Louisiana and they were in a different state, he's just sort of like, they got a house for free from Habitat for Humanity, they got trips that were free, and numerous surgeries. This is one of the really weird things. It's like, Dee Dee Blanchard somehow convinced doctors that Gypsy Rose had all of these medical conditions, and they performed various surgeries on her. Inserting the feeding tube was one that we mentioned, but also the removal of her salivary glands. One of the biggest reactions to this is that some people are just like, what on earth is going on with our medical system? Not saying anything political, no, but like, are people investigating all these doctors that did the things to Gypsy Rose when she didn't need them? Granted, some doctors did speak out. At least they wrote some memos or something like that. Not the most active responses, even the ones that recognized clearly, like the neurologist could see very clearly she didn't have muscular dystrophy. They could see she had functioning legs. If she hadn't been able to walk for 10 years, she would have had no calf muscle at all. They wrote some memos, although those weren't very helpful. Yeah. And then a lot of people are just like, are people going to investigate the doctors that were doing this stuff to her? Are the doctors perhaps also involved in some sort of for-profit scheme. So, Gypsy Rose spends years in a wheelchair, even though she doesn't need it. And she said very clearly, she knew that she could walk. She had the ability to walk. But she didn't know this. A lot of the other stuff was fake, like the muscular dystrophy and the cancer. And they shave her head because they say it's going to fall out anyway. And she went along with it for a long time. But eventually she learned that these medical conditions are not real. And that her mother is going through, well, she's going through the Munchausen by proxy syndrome issue. I always used to call it Munchild syndrome. I thought for like 10 years that thing was called Munchild syndrome, like Munchild. So if I ever slip up at all during this recording, just giving you a little bit of advance, but Munchausen by proxy. It wasn't until I was like 25 that I learned that I'd been mispronouncing it the whole time. Okay, but Dee Dee Blanchard was definitively involved. I mean, like she had a case of Munchausen by proxy. And Dr. Phil did a whole Dateline special on that, and I know Dr. Phil isn't the most credible person in the world, but it was really interesting to see the contrast between the HBO documentary and the Dr. Phil episode, because they revealed just some sort of different perspectives. Somebody told me this back when I was probably 15 or 16, that they didn't like documentaries, and I'm like, what? Why don't you like documentaries? And then she said, they're too one-sided. And to provide a little context, we were talking about Michael Moore films, and yeah, okay, some guy like him, he's one-sided, but yes, the HBO film was trying to show certain sides. Some documentaries are not one-sided, though. They just give you the complete overview of the facts, and that just you're supposed to kind of draw your own conclusion. Others try to push a narrative. But you could really see some different balances, because the Dr. Phil thing is mostly an interview that has a few story tie-ins. So it's quite different than, because you get to hear Gypsy Rose narrate things for so much longer. But one of the things, though, that happens is Gypsy Rose realizes she can walk. She realizes that she doesn't have all these health conditions, which the neighbors around the house had no idea that it was all fake. But Gypsy Rose catches on. So one of the things is she starts to grow up. She knows that her mother is doing bad stuff to her, and she starts to use the internet. She makes a dating profile, and she meets this guy, Nick Godejohn. And they start talking, and he also has his own psychological issues. He has a variant of an autistic disorder. What was it? Autism spectrum disorder? Excuse me if I've forgotten the exact name. But they get together, and they decide that they are going to be conspiring about the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard. And that's the nutshell version. The extended version is it was very heavily premeditated. And to the credit of the HBO filmmakers, they really tried to argue the case like, is Gypsy Rose Blanchard completely manipulating the scene? And it's a good question. Like, is she just sort of someone who is somewhat sociopathic? And when you see her crying in the interviews, is that all just acting? Because they were really trying to just ask that question, because it seemed like she was heavily involved with the premeditation. And one YouTuber actually kind of said something in favor of that when he was like, okay, the issue with Gypsy Rose Blanchard is that once they separated her at the trial from Nick Godejohn, after the murder's done, after Dee Dee Blanchard is dead, after they're going to be tried separately, I mean, like, this guy kind of delivered it better than I can, but she's just like, peace, see ya. And yeah, it's like she didn't really have the same sort of connection for him. Like, it wasn't really deep love. And that's the thing that, like, maybe HBO and that one guy on YouTube were trying to go at. Did she really have any love for him? Or did she just have a useful individual that could have committed the murder of Dee Dee Blanchard? That could have committed the murder. But why did she leave? Why didn't she leave? Why did she stay through all this? And this is one of the biggest questions that I was even wondering about. All right, so you're in a wheelchair. You know you can walk. I mean, why not getting up in front of a crowd or something and be like, I can walk. She's forcing me to do this as a scam. She's forcing me to do this so she can get money. Why not just do that? Or like another example, why not just leave? And these things have been addressed by a few people. Once again, I haven't seen the Hulu show The Act, but one of the, I believe it's the person who plays Gypsy Rose in the show, was addressing that. And once again, I'm hearing about this from other people. So they're just sort of like, if she left, then Dee Dee Blanchard would have found them. If she could do that, if she just stood up and in front of a crowd and was like, I can walk, my mother is a scam artist, then, it might have made her life somewhat worse. Her mother would have gone to jail. And it's probably also somewhat of fear. Because, once again, the eyes are going to come on her and such. But I think there's a lot of fear involved with that. But you have to wonder about the thought process that goes into something like that. Because we recently covered the case of Jennifer Pan on this channel, which was another girl who she tried to have her parents murdered. Her mother was murdered, but her father survived the attempted, assassination, if you will, so she could stay with her boyfriend. But people were just like, why didn't she just move in with her boyfriend? Why does she have to murder her parents? There's some very large psychological issue that goes on with that. Gypsy Rose is very similar. Another reason this might have been coming into the sort of suggested videos on YouTube is, a couple days ago, we talked about the case of Denali Bramer on this channel. The girl from, she's not really a girl, she's a young woman actually. She's an adult now. The woman from Anchorage, Alaska, who was offered $9 million to kill her best friend. And she did that. Of course, there's no actual $9 million. The guy online was using a fake name. It was a total scam. She was offered $9 million to murder her best friend and to sexually assault 2 minors. And she did that because of a manipulative personality. It's very similar in the sense that you have 2 people meeting online, and in the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, she convinces Nick to murder her mother. In the case of Denali Bramer, it's like this person on the internet convinces her to murder her best friend, though. It's like, in one case it's the girl convincing the guy to do it, in the other case the guy is convincing the girl to do it, but very similar sentences were handed out. Is this just the standard? The guy that's convinced the Denali Bramer in Alaska to murder her best friend will face 9 years in prison for murder, conspiracy, and things like that. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is, of course, facing 10 years in prison, eligible for parole after 8.5 years. Is that just the standard that you have for murder conspiracy now? It's like you intentionally get involved with the plotting of somebody's murder and you only get 10 years? I was very clear about the guy who convinced Denali Bramer to murder her best friend and sexually assault children. I was like, he should be facing life. I mean, he was a direct participant in the planning of this, and it happened because of his directions. The issue with Gypsy Rose Blanchard is, we don't know if it happened because of her direction. We really don't know who was the ultimate aggressor in that. And perhaps the police might have a little bit more information about the text messages. Very poorly planned crime by Gypsy Rose Blanchard, because all of that stuff on social media, you think that people can't read that? They're writing on Facebook, the bitch is dead and such. Granted, they might have been trying to throw a false lead with that one. When they said the bitch is dead and I raped her daughter. I mean, that might have been a false lead, but the conversations were not. The conversations that Gypsy Rose is having with her boyfriend were not. And it's possible that Gypsy Rose was a very manipulative individual who tried to convince Nick Godejohn to murder someone. But at the same time, Nick Godejohn was also somebody who went along with everything, and he's the one who's coming up with these bizarre sexual fantasies. But that's why they sort of are trying to use the word sociopath to describe Gypsy Rose. Is she just somebody who was just waiting for the right guy to go along, waiting for the person who was susceptible to manipulation, waiting for the person that she knew she could convince to murder her mother? Because that's the ultimate get out card. If her mother goes to jail for a little while, she's just going to start manipulating other people. And I mean, Gypsy Rose could have gone to the police much more frequently than she could have had her mother murdered. And that's similar to what we discussed with Jennifer Pan. It's just there were so many other easy ways out. But when people have gone through long-term abuse, the situation isn't always so clear. When people have gone through the abuse that I cannot even begin to imagine about what Gypsy Rose Blanchard would have been experiencing, not going to school, being told to use a wheelchair when you didn't know how. Granted, the Dr. Phil episode really showed that she didn't always use the wheelchair. It wasn't until she had some sort of accident riding on her grandfather's motorcycle that they had her use that. Originally, she started out using a walker, and the HBO film left that out, and I thought that was an interesting choice. But the whole point is, the situation was faked. It was staged. It was done for attention and for profit by Dee Dee Blanchard, especially for profit. She's using her daughter as a cash cow, also destroying her life. But at the same time, very bizarre situation that happened. What do you think? What do you think was the biggest motivation for Dee Dee Blanchard to get murdered? What do you think was the biggest motivation for Gypsy Rose and Nick Godejohn, I would say, to murder Dee Dee Blanchard, as opposed to one of the other possibilities we could talk about, going to the police or getting out, or just running away to some place that was actually in illegal terms? What do you have to say about the case? Anything to say at all? I want to hear from you.